Absolute power has a strange side effect. It makes people incredibly weird. We're not talking about simple eccentricities. We're talking about a Roman emperor who replaced the heads of god statues with his own, a king so annoyed by a preacher he moved his entire castle, and a dictator who made his bodyguard unit a bizarre virgin-only club. These are the 33 most absurd, petty, and downright dumb demands in history, proving that when there's no one around to say no, things get very strange, very fast. 1. Let's begin with the culinary perfectionism of North Korea's Kim Jong Il, a man who believed his diet deserved its own special forces unit. He was pathologically obsessed with the quality of his rice, so he established a dedicated team of women whose sole purpose in life was to inspect every single grain before it was cooked. They would sit for hours, armed with tweezers and an ungodly amount of patience, ensuring that each grain was perfectly uniform in size, shape, and pristine white color. Any grain that was too long, too short, or had a slight chip was immediately discarded. While his people were grappling with famine, the dear leader was ensuring his personal rice bowl was a flawless mosaic of identical carbohydrates. This wasn't just being a picky eater, it was a form of microscopic tyranny, proving his absolute dominion over everything, right down to his dinner. 2. In the sweltering heat of ancient Egypt, Pharaoh Pepi II was plagued by a relentless enemy, flies. But a man who considered himself a living god couldn't possibly be bothered to swat them himself. So he devised a solution that was as ingenious as it was horrifyingly cruel. He commanded that a few of his slaves be stripped naked and then meticulously coated from head to toe in honey. These poor individuals were then strategically positioned around the throne room, serving as the world's first and most unethical biological bug zappers. The flies, instinctively drawn to the sugar, would get stuck on the slaves, leaving the pharaoh completely undisturbed in his fly-free sanctum. It was the ultimate expression of power and laziness combined. 3. King Henry VIII of England lived in a state of constant, well-fed paranoia. He saw potential assassins everywhere, and his fear seeped into the most intimate corners of his life, including his bed. To combat the threat of a poisoned pillow, he instituted a bizarre security ritual for his most elite and trusted servants, the grooms of the stool. After preparing the royal bed for the night, their final duty was to get down on their knees and plant a firm kiss on the sheets, the duvet, and the pillowcases. This wasn't a gesture of loving devotion to the linens. It was a life-or-death quality assurance check. If the groom didn't drop dead, the bed was deemed safe for the king. It was the ultimate loyalty test in an administration where your career could end with a promotion or a fatal allergic reaction to your boss's bedsheets. 4. We've all fantasized about getting away from an annoying neighbor, but King James VI of Scotland turned that fantasy into an architectural epic. He was profoundly, monumentally bored by the sermons of a local preacher. The clergyman's voice was apparently so mind-numbingly dull that the king decided a simple, "I'm not going to church today," wouldn't suffice. Instead, he made the completely rational decision to have his entire castle dismantled, stone by stone. This colossal structure was then painstakingly moved several miles down the road and reassembled, all for the singular purpose of being out of earshot. This wasn't just avoiding a conversation. It was a multi-ton, treasury-draining act of passive aggression, proving that with enough money and power, you can literally move your house to ghost someone. 5. King Henry IV of France marched to the beat of his own very pungent drummer. In an era where bathing was, at best, a biannual event, Henry was legendary for his formidable body odor, and he considered it a feature, not a bug. He believed his powerful natural scent was an aphrodisiac and a testament to his raw, masculine vitality. He famously instructed his mistress in a letter, "Don't wash, my love, I'll be home in 8 days." He took this preference to the extreme, demanding that courtiers and lovers alike forgo perfumes to better appreciate his robust personal aroma. It was a non-negotiable part of being in his inner circle. You had to breathe in the royal musk and pretend it was the sweet smell of power. 6. Muammar Gaddafi, the eccentric dictator of Libya, cultivated a public image that was equal parts terrifying and baffling, and his security detail was his masterpiece. He was exclusively protected by the Amazonian Guard, an elite cadre of all-female bodyguards. The hiring criteria for this unit would give a modern HR department a collective seizure. Not only did applicants need to be masters of combat, but Gaddafi also insisted that every single one of them be a virgin. Dressed in military-style uniforms, often paired with high heels and makeup, they swore an oath to die for him. The whole setup was a stroke of bizarre PR genius, a projection of power that was simultaneously progressive, creepy, and utterly intimidating, all wrapped in a designer package. 7. Frederick William I of Prussia, the Soldier King, was a man of rigid discipline and military obsession. His idea of a relaxing evening, however, was a bizarre, smoke-filled affair he called the Tobacco Parliament. This was a mandatory nightly gathering where his highest-ranking ministers and generals were required to sit in a room, drink endless steins of beer, and smoke tobacco from clay pipes while he grilled them on state affairs. But what if you were a non-smoker? The king didn't care. You were still forced to attend and hold a cold, unlit pipe in your mouth for the entire duration, just to maintain the aesthetic of the room. It was less of a gentleman's club and more of a suffocating high-stakes focus group, where you were judged on your ability to handle your liquor and pretend to enjoy secondhand smoke. 8. Why build a monument to yourself when you can just rename time? That was the logic of Saparmurat Niyazov, the dictator of Turkmenistan. In an act of ego so profound it's almost impressive, he decided the Gregorian calendar needed a personal touch. In 2002, he passed a law that renamed all the months of the year and days of the week. January became Turkmenbashi, his self-proclaimed title meaning leader of the Turkmen. He then named April after his deceased mother, Gurban Sultan. Not to be outdone, he also renamed bread after her. This was part of a broader campaign to erase culture and replace it with himself. A surreal project where an entire nation woke up one day to find that their birthdays now took place in the month of their leader's mom. 9. While most kings collect art or territory, King Frederick William I of Prussia had a much stranger and more unsettling hobby. He collected giant men. He was pathologically obsessed with having the tallest army regiment in the world, creating the legendary Potsdam Giants. He sent recruiters across Europe with strict height requirements, but when that didn't work, he just resorted to kidnapping. If you were a man over 6 feet tall, you weren't safe anywhere. He even tried to institute a bizarre breeding program, forcing tall men and women to marry. The funniest part? This elite, hand-picked regiment of giants, his pride and joy that cost a fortune to maintain, never fought in a single major battle. They were like a priceless action figure collection, too valuable to ever take out of the box. 10. Long before social media influencers had to buy fake followers, the Roman Emperor Nero pioneered the analog version with his personal 5,000-man hype squad, the Augustians. Nero fancied himself a world-class artist, a singer, actor, and poet, but he was plagued by a crippling need for validation. So he assembled a small army of young, strong knights whose only job was to attend his every performance and applaud on cue. This wasn't just simple clapping. They were trained in specific techniques with names like the brick and the tile to create a symphony of thunderous, godlike applause. It was a perfectly choreographed, state-sponsored ego boost, ensuring that no matter how bad his performance was, it was always met with a roar of manufactured adoration. 11. Every dictator needs a signature look, but Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire elevated his personal brand to the level of national law. His iconic accessory was a distinctive leopard print fur hat. He loved it so much that he decided no one else in the entire country was allowed to wear one. He actually issued a presidential decree that made it illegal for any citizen to wear a hat made of leopard skin. This wasn't about conservation. It was about copywriting his own style. Imagine a country where the fashion police were actual police, and you could get arrested for wearing the wrong accessory. In Mobutu's Zaire, style wasn't just a statement. It was a privilege reserved for one man, and copying him was literally a crime. 12. Empress Elizabeth of Austria, the famous Sisi, didn't just have long hair. She presided over it like it was a small kingdom. Her hair reached the floor, and its care was a daily, 3-hour religious ceremony that dominated her life. She employed a personal hairdresser whose job was arguably the most stressful in the entire empire. After the lengthy process of combing, washing, and braiding, the hairdresser had to present the empress with any hairs that had fallen out on a silver platter. Sisi would then inspect them, and if she felt too many had been lost, the poor stylist would be berated or even slapped. Her hair wasn't an accessory. It was a beautiful, floor-length tyrant that held both the empress and her staff hostage every single day. 13. When it comes to pure, uncut ego, few in history can compete with the Roman Emperor Caligula, a man who looked at the heavens and thought, "Needs more me." He wasn't content with just being worshipped. He wanted a divine facelift for the whole pantheon. He ordered some of the most famous and sacred statues of Greek gods, like Zeus, to be shipped to Rome. Once they arrived, he had the original heads lopped off and replaced with meticulously carved marble replicas of his own head. It was the ultimate act of arrogant blasphemy, ensuring that whenever a citizen went to pray, they were inadvertently gazing upon the smug face of their emperor. He didn't just want to be treated like a god, he wanted to physically usurp their identities. 14. Long before Instagram models and Photoshop, King George IV of the United Kingdom was a master of faking the perfect physique, using the 19th century equivalent of industrial-strength shapewear. The king was famously vain but also famously indulgent, leaving him considerably overweight. To maintain the illusion of a trim, military figure, he spent a fortune on custom-made corsets. These weren't delicate items. They were complex pieces of engineering, designed to hoist, compress, and contain the royal bulk into something resembling a respectable silhouette. He was so reliant on his girdle that he was rumored to have been buried in one. He literally spent a king's ransom not on public works, but on the structural engineering required to hide his snacks. 15. The first emperor of a unified China, Qin Shi Huang, was a man who conquered kingdoms, built the Great Wall, and commissioned the Terracotta Army. His final project was his most ambitious: to conquer death itself. He became utterly obsessed with finding the elixir of life, sending expeditions far and wide to find it. His court alchemists eventually convinced him they had the answer: tiny pills made of pure mercury, which they believed held the key to eternal life. Eagerly, the emperor began taking his daily dose of potent neurotoxin. In one of history's most spectacular and ironic self-owns, the man who wanted to live forever died at the age of 49, poisoned by the very immortality pills he believed would save him. 16. As the Byzantine Empress Zoe grew older, she developed a deeply unsettling obsession with preserving youth, turning her royal chambers into a scene from a horror movie. Her rooms became a full-blown cosmetics laboratory where she constantly brewed potions and perfumes. But her strangest demand was reserved for her young maids-in-waiting. She required them to sit completely motionless in her presence for hours on end, arranged around the room like beautiful living dolls. She wouldn't speak to them. She would just gaze at them, admiring their youthful beauty, as if they were inanimate objects in her collection. It was a bizarre and creepy spectacle, turning her court into a silent living museum dedicated to the youth she so desperately missed. 17. Ottoman Sultan Ibrahim I had a reign marked by chaos and incompetence, but his true passion was for one thing: fur. Not just a fur coat or a nice hat, but an all-consuming obsession with sable. He became so fixated on the luxurious material that he made one of the most fiscally insane demands in Ottoman history. He wanted everything in his palace upholstered in it. He ordered entire rooms to be lined with sable fur, from the walls and ceilings down to the curtains. The sheer expense of acquiring that much of the world's most expensive fur was astronomical, pushing the imperial treasury to the brink of collapse. While the empire crumbled around him, Ibrahim was literally stroking the walls of his own very expensive, very furry padded cell. 18. Ludwig II of Bavaria, often called the fairy tale king, was famous for building fantastical castles like Neuschwanstein. But inside these opulent palaces, he lived in a fantasy world of his own. He was painfully shy and socially anxious, so he preferred the company of people who couldn't talk back. He would regularly stage incredibly lavish, multi-course dinners for a full table of guests who didn't actually exist. Servants would bring out dish after dish, pouring wine for empty chairs as Ludwig held animated, one-sided conversations with his imaginary companions, often historical figures like Marie Antoinette or Louis XIV. It was a lonely, tragic spectacle of a king who could build dream castles for himself, but couldn't fill them with real friends. 19. Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu was consumed by a crippling paranoia that extended to every aspect of his daily life. He was utterly convinced that his enemies were constantly trying to poison or contaminate him, leading to some truly bizarre security measures. He famously never drank from the same glass twice, and a single sip from a bottle meant it had to be discarded. His clothes were considered a major security risk. Before he wore anything, it had to be disinfected by being sealed in a plastic bag and wiped down with alcohol by his security detail. He even had a personal chemical engineer travel with him to test his food for poison, bacteria, and radioactivity. It was a life lived in a self-imposed sterile bubble, ruled by the fear that death was hiding in his shirt collar. 20. José Gaspar Rodríguez de Francia, the first dictator of Paraguay, was so paranoid that he essentially turned the entire country into a giant, terrified game of hide-and-seek. He was convinced assassins lurked around every corner, so he created a series of bizarre decrees to ensure his safety during his daily walks. All citizens were required to close the shutters on their windows as his procession approached. Anyone caught on the street had to immediately lie face down on the ground and was forbidden from looking at him until he had passed. Violating this rule was punishable by death. He effectively turned his capital city into a ghost town for a few minutes every day, a silent testament to a man whose fear of his own people was so absolute, he couldn't even bear for them to look at him. 21. King Christian VII of Denmark was known for his severe mental illness, which often made him unfit to rule. During his moments of clarity and chaos alike, his closest confidant was not a minister or a family member, but his favorite dog, a poodle named Gourmand. The king's affection for the dog was so intense that he made a truly bizarre demand. He insisted that Gourmand be given an official seat on the state council. Court officials were forced to treat the dog as a fellow council member, and the king would often pause discussions to consult with the poodle, supposedly taking its barks and whimpers as serious political advice. While his ministers tried to run a country, they had to share the room with a dog whose opinion could technically influence state policy. 22. Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II was a man of science and endless curiosity, but one of his experiments veered into horrifyingly unethical territory. He wanted to discover the natural language of mankind, the language Adam and Eve would have spoken. To do this, he ordered a group of newborn infants to be taken from their parents and raised in complete isolation. Foster mothers were instructed to feed and bathe the children, but they were strictly forbidden from ever speaking, cuddling, or showing any form of affection to them. The emperor's hypothesis was that, free from human influence, the children would eventually begin speaking the original divine language. The tragic result? The experiment was a catastrophic failure. The babies, deprived of basic human contact and love, all died. 23. In 1787, the Austrian Emperor Joseph II decided it was time for the Jewish population of his empire to adopt German-style hereditary surnames, but he turned the process into a cruel, bureaucratic shakedown. The decree forced Jewish families to register a permanent last name, but the quality of the name you received depended entirely on how much you could bribe the officials. Wealthy families could purchase beautiful poetic names like Rosenthal, Rose Valley, or Goldstein, Goldstone. The poor who couldn't afford the fees were often saddled with deliberately offensive or absurd names like Weinreb, sour grape, Schwein, pig, or Betelarm, destitute. It was a state-sanctioned system of humiliation, where your family's identity for generations to come was determined by a backroom deal. 24. The Mughal Emperor Jahangir was obsessed with his image as a just and accessible ruler, and he came up with a brilliantly theatrical way to prove it. He ordered the installation of a massive chain of justice. This was a huge golden chain, adorned with 60 bells, that stretched from the wall of his palace all the way to a stone post on the bank of the river. The idea was that any citizen, no matter how poor or humble, who felt they had been wronged, could pull the chain. This would ring the bells directly in the emperor's chambers, allowing them to bypass the corrupt courts and appeal for justice directly from the man himself. It was a magnificent piece of political theater, though historical records are a bit fuzzy on how many people actually dared to wake the emperor with their problems. 25. King Frederick the Great of Prussia faced a serious problem. His people refused to eat potatoes. They were suspicious of the strange new vegetable, considering it tasteless, dirty, and even ungodly. After direct orders to plant them failed, Frederick devised a brilliant plan based on reverse psychology. He had a royal potato patch planted and then ordered it to be heavily guarded by his soldiers, making it look like the crop was incredibly valuable and reserved only for the king. He then gave the guards secret instructions to be a little careless with their duties. As he predicted, the local peasants, thinking they were stealing a rare royal delicacy, began sneaking into the fields at night to pilfer the potatoes for their own gardens. The plan worked perfectly, and Frederick tricked his entire country into adopting a new staple food. 26. Frederick the Great's controlling nature didn't stop at vegetables. He also had a complicated relationship with coffee. He believed the popular new drink was a threat to the nation's beer industry, and by extension, the state's tax revenue. So he created a state monopoly on coffee and tried to discourage public consumption. To enforce this, he hired a special squad of former soldiers who became known as coffee sniffers. Their entire job was to wander the streets all day, literally sniffing the air for the forbidden aroma of roasting coffee beans. If they sniffed out an illegal roasting operation, they would report it to the authorities. It was a bizarre form of culinary espionage, where the state's greatest enemy smelled like a delicious breakfast blend. 27. While it remains one of the most famous and officially denied stories from North Korea, the tale of Kim Jong-un's mandatory haircut is too good not to include. According to reports that surfaced in 2014, the North Korean government issued a directive requiring all male university students to get the exact same haircut as their supreme leader. The iconic high on the sides, floppy on top style became the only officially sanctioned look on campus. Female students were reportedly advised to adopt a bob cut similar to that of his wife, Ri Sol-ju. It's a perfect example of totalitarianism extending to its most personal and absurd conclusion, where the state doesn't just control your thoughts but also your hairstyle, turning an entire generation into lookalikes of their leader. 28. The Italian dictator Benito Mussolini cultivated an image of fearsome, masculine power, and his dietary habits were a key part of that persona. He had an almost fanatical love for raw garlic. He would reportedly consume entire bowls of it, coarsely chopped and drenched in olive oil and lemon juice, believing it was essential for his health and vitality. This habit, however, made his personal life a living nightmare for those around him. His own wife, Rahel, found the smell so overpowering and repulsive that she was often forced to sleep in a separate bedroom. The man who wanted to command an empire couldn't even command a shared bed, all thanks to his weaponized garlic-infused breath that could probably repel an army. 29. When Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, unified the warring states, he decided that history itself needed a reboot, starting with him. To ensure his reign was seen as a complete reset of civilization, he ordered one of the most infamous acts of cultural destruction in history, the Great Burning of the Books in 213 BC. He commanded that nearly all historical records and philosophical texts from previous dynasties be destroyed. The only books spared were practical manuals on topics like medicine, agriculture, and divination. Any scholar caught hiding or even discussing the old texts was to be executed in the most brutal way. It was a terrifying attempt to erase the past and create a society where all knowledge and history began and ended with one man. 30. The legendary lawgiver of ancient Sparta, Lycurgus, was obsessed with forging a society of perfect warriors, and he believed that equality and discipline started at the dinner table. He instituted a bizarre and deeply unpopular law that required all male citizens to eat every single meal together in public mess halls called syssitia. Private family dinners were forbidden. The goal was to eliminate luxury and build camaraderie. To further discourage any enjoyment, the food served was intentionally bland and disgusting, most famously a vile black broth made of pork, salt, vinegar, and blood. It was a system where dinner wasn't a pleasure, but a mandatory, foul-tasting performance of civic duty, ensuring no one got too comfortable or forgot they were living in a military machine. 31. The great Mongol ruler Kublai Khan was a visionary leader, but he was also a financial tyrant. In the 13th century, he introduced one of the world's first widely circulated paper currencies. This was a revolutionary idea, but he didn't exactly leave its adoption up to the free market. He issued a decree that made using his paper money, made from the bark of mulberry trees, the only legal form of currency in his vast empire. Anyone who refused to accept it, or who was caught trying to use gold, silver, or other forms of payment, was to be put to death. It was a brilliant but brutal economic reform, forcing his subjects to accept the concept of fiat money at the point of a sword, and proving that even financial policy can be a matter of life and death. 32. By the late 13th century, London's dark, narrow alleyways had become a hotbed of violent crime. King Edward I, known as Longshanks, decided to crack down with a very specific piece of legislation. He issued a proclamation that made it illegal for any man within the city walls to carry a long knife, known as a pugio, or any other bladed weapon after the city's curfew bell had rung. If you were caught out at night with a weapon, you faced serious punishment. It was one of the earliest forms of weapon control in a major city, a royal demand that Londoners settle their disputes with harsh words rather than a blade in the back, forcing them to leave their personal security tools at home while the city slept. 33. Centuries before modern environmental movements, King Edward I of England launched a surprisingly early war on air pollution. During his reign, Londoners began burning cheap sea coal for fuel, which created a thick, acrid smog that choked the city. The king, who found the smoke personally irritating and believed it was harmful to health, issued a royal proclamation in 1273 that banned the burning of sea coal in London while Parliament was in session. The punishment for violating this decree was severe: torture or even execution. It was perhaps the first environmental law in history, driven not by a concern for the planet, but by a king who was so annoyed by the smell that he was willing to kill over it. That was a tour through 33 minds warped by absolute power, each demand a monument to ego and paranoia. But for every story we found, there are dozens buried in history books, and we know we've missed some. So this is your challenge. What is the single most insane, unbelievable demand from a ruler that we failed to mention? Find the one story that makes our list look tame. Drop it in the comments below. And if you enjoy having your view of history thoroughly warped, you know what to do. Like and subscribe.